Oh, no.
Starting, what?
Just like connecting
us. Okay. We're gonna start with word of the day. I don't think we had this. Do you know what a polemic is?
Definitely heard of it.
Yeah. It's a genre of writing.
I was gonna say it sounds like a poem.
Yeah, it's not a poem. Polemic is a strong verbal or written attack on someone or something. I guess it's not just writing, but like speech. The animal rights activist published a vicious polemic against the makers of fur coats. Okay, so it's like a vicious attack. The topic is Shadal's opposition to philosophical Judaism. And you've probably heard the name Shadal dropped by me or other people, but do you know who he is? I forgot if I've told you who he is. So, first of all, got to do b'shem omro, right? Got to give credit where credit is due. So the shiur that I'm giving was inspired by an article written by someone named, I don't know who this is, Professor Rabbi Marty Lokshin, called The Mitzvah to Love God, Shadal's polemic against the philosophical interpretation, which I was introduced to by someone named Rabbi Ari Sklar, who sent me this article and said, you're either going to love this or hate it. So that was the hook. And then all the translations of Shadal here, I usually use my own translations, but his were good, so I used his and just tweaked them a little bit. So that's just giving credit here. Okay, so Shadal, that's him. Say hi.
Whoa, not how I imagined him.
Yeah. Yeah, so he is, this is from the, they're coming out with these, I think they're coming out with them, like, as we speak, these translations of his commentary on Chumash. They just came out with Vayikra. So this is from the back of this book.
I think people are going to see that cover and just not trust him.
Yeah, I mean, there were people who disagree with him or because he didn't have a beard. You know, that was a controversial thing. But that's not the most controversial thing about him. So let me read this and I'll give my own spiel. Samuel David Luzzatto, 1800 to 1865. So he's a late Acharon, okay? Known by his Hebrew acronym Shadal, was the leading Italian Jewish scholar of the 19th century. A linguist, educator, and religious thinker, he devoted his talents above all to the interpretation of the Bible. As a master of Hebrew grammar and usage, he focused on the plain meaning of the text, Pshat. Although he was a devout believer in the divinity, unity, and antiquity of the Torah, Shadal approached the text in a remarkably free spirit of inquiry, drawing upon a wide variety of sources, ancient and contemporary, Jewish and non-Jewish. As a result, his interpretations may strike even the modern reader as fresh and novel. Okay, so in my mind, he is in the same category as Rav Hirsch and the Malbim in that he was primarily about Chumash, but a very independent thinker who like came up with his own approach. And the thing that makes him unique is you know what it means to pigeonhole someone? It means to like label them in a certain way. You can't pigeonhole him. So he was anti-philosophy or philosophical Judaism. He was anti-Kabbalah. He was pro he was obviously pro halacha and divine origin of Torah and stuff. But like he learned with people who were like the beginning Reform Jews and everything like that. He criticized them too. He was a grammar guy. Which Rishon in your mind of the Rishonim is like the grammar guy? You know, Ibn Ezra. Okay, he writes so many harsh comments about Ibn Ezra, and like it's completely like against him. But then he praises him like when he does good stuff. He's what are some other things? Oh yeah, like he quotes from non-Jewish people. He was into secular learning, but not putting certain types of secular sources in Judaism. So you just can't like pin him down. Okay. And fun fact, have you heard of the Ramchal, Mesilas Yesharim? If you haven't heard of him, you will. Yeah. Yeah, so they are related. I think he's like the great grandnephew, and he's also related to Fiorello LaGuardia, like mayor of New York. Fiorello LaGuardia's mom was Jewish and is from the Luzzatto family. So I think that's pretty cool, like family tree there. Anyway, so that's who he is. He's not so well known, but he's apparently becoming more popular. And I only discovered him this year. Okay, so that's his deal, and you're gonna get a real taste of what his stuff is like today. Okay, so what he did is he, Unclos translated Torah into Aramaic, but his translation is like a minimal commentary. So he translated the whole Torah the whole Chumash into Italian. And then he wrote a commentary on the whole Torah in Hebrew because he held that Hebrew was like the superior language. But yeah. Okay, so today's objectives are based on a premise. I know not everyone who's listening to this live or in recording is a Shalhavit or formal Shalhavit student, but my shiur, you guys are the main audience, right? So my shiur is based on two premises. Premise number one, and I'm not saying this is true for everyone, but you can, Shalhavit students by default are assumed to be quote unquote Maimonidean. based on their educational upbringing. And by that, I mean that like almost all of your teachers, if not all of them, would consider themselves to be like, Maimonidean in their thinking in terms of learning Rambam, having Rambam ideas about God, et cetera, okay? Again, I'm not saying this, I'm saying by default, like that's the general assumption. Okay, premise number 2, and this I don't know if it's true. Shalhavit students are aware that there are those who disagree with the Rambam, but probably haven't been exposed to a real anti-Maimonidean polemic firsthand. So like you've done machlokes between Rambam and Ramban, but have you read anything which is someone setting out to attack the Rambam, like in essay form? Okay, I figured not. You may get exposed to this in seminary, but this might be your first exposure, okay? So these are the premises of the goals. So the goals for today are, we're gonna read his commentary on Devarim 6.5, which is Ve'ahavta, about ahavas Hashem, and it's gonna be an example of a rational anti-Maimonidean critique, meaning there are plenty of people who critique the Rambam for irrational reasons, then there are ones who have ideas that are like, that there's merit to their arguments, and I think Shadal, I don't agree with everything he says, but I think he's critiquing Rambam from a rational place, not just an irrational place. And by irrational, I mean like some people would be like, oh, the Rambam says that God doesn't have emotions. I don't like that, that's not what he's saying. 2 is we're going to discuss the strengths and weaknesses of his arguments. My goal is not to convince you that they're correct or that they're incorrect, but just we'll discuss them. 3, a little bit of rhetorical analysis, because you'll see that he really is harsh. And I want to try to understand why he's so harsh. Okay. And I think that our rhetorical analysis skills will come in handy here. 4 is, this is kind of like an emotional goal. I want you to appreciate him as an example of a truly independent thinker who's truly advocating independent thinking. And I know you've met and seen examples of that, but I think it really shines forth here. And then 5, usually, I do takeaways at the end. I kind of want to we'll formulate our own takeaways, hopefully, if we have time. Okay, let's go. Before we do this, let's prove how Maimonidean you are. According to the Rambam, according to the Rambam, what is the mitzvah to love God? How do you fulfill that? Oh yeah, yeah, exactly. Torah and science. Okay, I could not have said it any more concisely. No, that was perfect, right? So quick review just inside. This is probably the source you have learned. What is the method of loving him? And he says loving him and fearing him, but we're only talking about love today. When a person understands his great and wondrous works and creations and sees from them his wisdom, which is incomparable and infinite, he immediately loves, praises, and extols and experiences a great desire to know the great name. As David says, my soul thirsts for God, for the living God. So you're doing it through your mind, through the study of, in the Mishnah Torah, science, and then in the Sefer Mitzvos, he says it's through Torah. But then what is the feeling that the Rambam is saying is called love of God? A thirst for knowledge. Okay, right. So keep that in mind. The lesser known definition, which I don't know if you've read inside, is in Hilchos Tshuva. He says, it is known and clear that the love of Kadosh Baruch Hu will not be bound up in the heart of man until he immerses himself in it continually, properly, and abandons everything else in the world aside from it. Now, that does not mean leave your home and go to the desert. It means that that is what your life revolves around. And it does also mean giving up on certain things, like giving up on certain, intrinsic pursuits of material success and certain pleasures and stuff. As he commanded with all your heart and all your soul, that is in accordance with the knowledge by which you know him. The love corresponds to the knowledge. If the knowledge is little, the love will be little. If the knowledge is a lot, the love will be a lot. Okay. And then he ends off by saying, therefore, a person needs to devote himself to understand and comprehend the sciences and branches of understanding, which give him a knowledge of his creator in accordance with the capacity of man to understand and grasp. So basically, you got to devote yourself to knowledge. So this is what the Shadal is going to be arguing against. Now, we got a lot to cover, and I tried, as I usually do, I tried giving this over in yeshiva last night, and even in yeshiva where I had an hour, we had to rush a little bit. So we'll dwell on some points, but I want to give you the full picture, and we could always discuss this later on in the week, okay? But obviously ask questions if you have them. Okay, so he says like this, what this mitzvah, the love of God, means requires explanation. Actually, there would be no real inherent difficulty or doubt about it were it not for the fact that the medieval Jewish philosophers imported the ideas of Greek thinkers into the Torah, and they changed various aspects of the Torah to get them to concur with the classical philosophers. Now, what's our Hebrew term for medieval Jewish philosophers? Rishonim, right? So he's talking about the Rishonim, and not necessarily all of the Rishonim. He's talking about what we would call the philosophical Rishonim, okay? For example, not Rashi, right? Rashi did not learn Greek philosophy, but, you know, Rambam did, and Ralbag and Ibn Ezra and all those other guys.
This is not just Rambam.
Yeah, it's really all of them. And the reason why and that's why I called it Shadal's opposition to philosophical Judaism, but he focuses most heavily on the Rambam. Okay, and since this was an impossible thing to do, meaning to change aspects of Torah to get them to concur with the classical philosophers, they took philosophy and Torah and made of them a mishmash that is neither Torah nor philosophy, and ended up losing on both counts. Your eyes are getting big, right? Nowadays, that old type of philosophy no longer exists, but Jewish books are still filled with it, so that neither true scholars nor true Torah Jews find satisfaction in them. Okay, so what we're going to do, just for clarity's sake, is he makes lots of claims. Remember putting on your claim glasses, claims of fact values. Don't worry, don't get traumatized. But I feel it would help to outline his main claims. So what is he basically claiming here in your own words?
That they tried to fit in their knowledge of philosophy with the Torah, and it turned out it's like some random thing which is neither.
Exactly, right? Some sort of like monster, like Frankenstein hybrid or whatever. So the Rishonim attempted to combine Torah and Greek philosophy, but they ended up with something that's a mishmash and is now outdated. Okay, meaning it's even worse than a mishmash. It's a mishmash of Torah and some outdated ideas. Okay. Oh, and by the way, just so you're aware, I meant to say this. Even though we're reading the Shadal, these critiques are shared by lots of people. So you will hear them in seminary, you will hear them in, like, you know, maybe in college, you'll hear them like from other people. You know, Rav Hirsch has his own critique of the Rambam, which encompasses a lot of these things. And, you know, so this is not just Shadal, but I just wanted to do this because it's a you know, concise commentary excerpt. Okay. Now he's going to give an example. As an example, I will cite the words of the Mavair, i.e. the commentator on the standard Mendelssohn Chumash. Now, do you know who Moses Mendelssohn was? Reform. He was considered the father or grandfather of Reform Judaism, which I think halakhically Mendelssohn kept an Orthodox life, but I think like he planted the seeds of Reform Judaism. And again, example, Shadal quotes Mendelssohn's Chumash a lot because he says he's got good ideas. All right, so he says, so he's quoting now a commentator on Mendelssohn. I quote, "You shall love the Lord your God. Find joy in the understanding of his infinite perfection. Be elated when you proclaim his faithfulness and his unity, and when you do what is pleasant in his eyes, for those are the ways of love." Okay, which sounds kind of like the definition of, according to Rambam, right? Sounds a little bit like the Rambam of finding joy, finding understanding in contemplation. The beginning of his comment, "Find joy in the understanding of his infinite perfection," follows the way of the Greek scholars. And the end of his comment, "Do what is pleasant in his eyes," follows the way of Jewish scholars. But these two approaches are mutually exclusive. So he's now going to define why he thinks philosophy and Torah are mutually exclusive, okay? He says, so I really am amazed at the Jewish philosophers. How did they not realize that what the Torah wants is not what philosophy wants? Philosophy wants us to know and recognize truth. Torah wants us to do what is right and what is good. What are you thinking?
Yeah, they're mutually exclusive.
Oh, they are?
I was thinking they're the same thing.
Okay.
Does mutually
Means that they can't be combined.
the opposite?
You think that they're
They
like,
have to be together.
they have to be together. Okay. Well, so you're both thinking the same thing? Is that?
Mutual. Yeah.
Yeah, exclusive means that they are, as opposed to overlapping.
Right.
Yeah. So why are you saying that they're overlapping, or that they're not mutually exclusive? Either of you?
Like, you want to do it as good, but it's truly good. Not just like, you can't know what is good and what is right and what is wrong without knowing the truth.
Okay, so let me just clarify his claim here. I don't think we talked about this in English, but there are two types of nonfiction books: theoretical books and practical books. Theoretical is to know what is or is not true, you know, like a science textbook or whatever. And then practical is to know how to do or make something, like like physics is a theoretical study, engineering is a practical study, you know, or like art history is theoretical, and then a painting class is practical. So what he's saying is, obviously, if you want to do a painting class, you need to know, like, is this truly paint, you know? But he's saying that the purpose of philosophy is just to know truth for its own sake, and the purpose of Torah is action. And you'll need to learn stuff in order to do what is right and good, but the purpose is action. Okay, just to clarify what he's saying. And if, okay, now you might challenge him and say, well, doesn't the Torah teach philosophical ideas? Right? So he says, yeah.
Well, the Torah only teaches what you put into it.
No, but let's say, for example, I mean, he'll say this in a second, but the idea of God's oneness, or the idea that the universe was created, right?
You could turn it into a philosophical idea. It doesn't have to be.
Okay, so what else would it be if it wasn't a philosophical idea?
Factual.
Yeah, but factual is what he's calling philosophy, because factual means to know truth.
You could just hear it on a mundane level, like bodies want. Like, you don't have to.
No, but why would the Torah even teach that?
If the Torah is just about action.
Yeah, that's what he's saying. Yeah, if the Torah is just about action, why would it include it? Yeah.
Like, why would there be ideas?
Why would there be ideas that don't seem connected to action? Okay, so he says, and if the Torah teaches us a few philosophical ideas, such as the unity of God and the fact that the world was created, it was not for the purpose that we would then acquire the true knowledge of God and recognition of his perfection, as they put it. Rather, it was so as to implant in our souls useful beliefs that will lead us towards justice and righteousness. No, because so if you ask Rambam, okay, hey Rambam, why does the Torah teach us about God's oneness? Or why does the Torah teach us about that God created the world out of nothing? What would the Rambam say?
It's like you're asking like to know truth.
To know truth, because the whole purpose of Torah is to know truth. So of course the Torah is going to teach you the fundamental ideas of reality. But Shadal is saying the Torah is not at all aimed to teach you truth for its own sake. It's teaching you truth as a means towards justice and righteousness and doing good. Okay.
I would say the Rambam is like his goal, let's say, is, I mean, this is just my bad understanding, but to live in line with reality. So you learn truth how you could live in line with it.
Yes and no, because Rambam definitely agrees that understanding the truth and living in line with it is the highest level of good action. But he would say, though, that what makes you human is your Tzelem Elokim, which is your knowledge, truth-seeking component, and that the purpose of the human being is to have a knowledge of the truth for its own sake, even if it was disconnected to action. So for example, like learning about the universe to understand the universe is not going to affect how you act, but that it's not all. I mean, in what way? Like for example, let's say understanding particle physics or whatever, or like black holes or whatever, like that. We say that that's not valuable because you're appreciating God's chachma.
Right. Well, then it would affect it.
But what's the ikar though? No, meaning what is the reason and what is the symptom? Because certainly it would affect how you act because you would go about like in awe and in humility. But Shadal would say that is the purpose. The Rambam would say no. The purpose is to know God, and like the symptom or the result will be that you'll act differently.
The purpose of the Torah is Talmud Torah.
According to the Rambam, yes, is knowledge of God, through Torah and science, and it will spill over and affect your actions and your emotions. But the ikar is the knowledge, and the clearest expression of this really is in Olam Haba. It's pure knowledge. Like you don't have any action at all in Olam Haba according to the Rambam because it's not physical.
And then why do we have all the mitzvot?
And all the mitzvahs are a means to living a life of knowledge, either by directly giving you true ideas and removing false ideas, or by giving you good midos, which are a means to living in line with knowledge or seeking knowledge, or to create a society that lends itself to the pursuit of knowledge. Yeah, and that's why it's such an extreme in the Rambam's perspective statement that the two are mutually exclusive. Rambam says no, the two are combined, and Shadal is saying it's mutually exclusive. Rambam is saying that the Torah teaches us to know what is right and good in order to get us to live a life of pursuing truth. And Shadal is saying they're on two different tracks. Okay, so just to summarize, philosophy and Torah are mutually exclusive. The purpose of philosophy is to know truth. The purpose of Torah is good actions. Now, as an example of someone who might try to pigeonhole Shadal, okay, if you saw him saying this, what might you assume about his attitude towards philosophy? Yeah, waste of time. No, Torah is the only thing. So he refutes the naysayer. He says, one other thing. All seemingly philosophical Torah content is for the sake of action. And I'm going to give you an example of this that is extreme. And this is not what the Shadal is saying, but someone else said this to me earlier in the year. Someone said, why does the Torah teach us that God is not physical? Now, what would the Rambam say the answer to that is? Because it's true. Someone tried to make the argument to me earlier in the year that the Torah wants you to believe that God is not physical, because if you held that God was physical, you would think that he would be limited to space, and therefore you could sin and he wouldn't see you. So the Torah teaches that God is non-physical so that you never sin thinking that God can't see you. Now that's an extreme example of like that person who said that to me, again, that's not Shadal. That person is basically arguing that the Torah only presented this belief because the belief is useful, right? That it's useful for that sake. But again, Rambam would say, no, the Torah teaches God is not physical because the purpose of the human being is to have knowledge, and knowledge of reality, and like knowing that God's not physical is knowledge of reality.
How is he defining good? Good is a value system, but it's not based on truth.
No. So that's what I'm saying, is he holds that it is based on truth, but the purpose of Torah is not to teach you the philosophical idea, it's to get you to act correctly. Okay, you'll see this, it'll complement in this 1 second. Okay, this, oh, sorry, not quite yet, the next one. And this is why the Torah and the prophets always make God seem smaller and closer to the level of humans, attributing to him anger and will, love and hate, happiness and sadness, and various other ways of saying that he is affected by things that happen external to him and that he's subject to deficiencies. All this is done so as to help us imagine some connection between us and him. But if, to the contrary, we imagine in our hearts the God of the philosophers, who is perfect in an infinite form of perfection, then it is simply impossible to conceive of any relationship or connection between him and human beings, and one could then not imagine any of the world's religions. What purpose then would there be for prayer if God is not imagined to be subject to being affected? What purpose is there for tshuva if God's will is not imagined to be subject to change? Now, this is a little dicey because according to the Rambam, why does the Torah describe God in human terms? So we can understand him. Right. So is that the same or different than what he's saying?
Also, the fact that he is saying that God doesn't actually have these qualities, like we attribute the qualities to him, like you can only come to that by.
So that I'm actually not sure that he's saying that. He's trying to say, in other words, he doesn't actually say that God is changeable or physical, and I don't think he holds that. Okay, but he's saying that the Torah is describing him in these ways so that we can feel these things about God, because that allows us to connect to him. And if the Torah just described God in the absolutely true philosophical terms of being unchanging and unknowable and non-physical, we wouldn't have any connection to him. So I don't know if he's actually, if he and the Rambam would disagree about why the Torah uses these terms, but one thing that is clear, and I'm going to reflect this in my summary, the Torah describes Hashem in human terms because this allows us to form a connection with him. So that's the part I think the Rambam might agree with. But then B, this concern overrides the concern for philosophical accuracy. In other words, according to the Rambam would like, I mean, again, I'm kind of like going to dramatize this. The Rambam would cringe when he sees philosophical descriptions of God because they're not accurate. Sorry, when he sees physical descriptions of God because they're not accurate. Rambam holds this like a necessary evil, Shadal is saying, no. The Torah wants us to feel these things about God because that's what it means to be connected to him. That's how we form a connection with him.
I think their end goal, like they both agree with A.
Yeah.
Sense, but then Rambam says form a connection with him to get to the truth.
Yes.
And Shadal says to follow Torah.
Exactly. Okay, good. And that's a very good summary because you're going to see what he says. Again, I forgot the order here. Do you want to say something like
that? Right. Like if someone is like trying to understand God, like why, like Shadal could literally just say that the end goal is just so that you know who you're talking to, let's say when you daven. And then that's the same thing as the Rambam.
Yeah.
To know truth. You just say that truth is good. If you equate truth to good.
Right. So that's why in my mind, even though I like what you said, I think it is going to come down to a matter of, is the goal to wean you off of these physical descriptions, which the Rambam would say yes. The Rambam would say like Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't need these physical descriptions. It's only like, it's like crutches, it's like a training wheels, Shadal would say, no, this is, and this is going to become clear in a second, but this is what it means to have a relationship with God, is to think of him and feel, to feel towards him in these emotional terms. Let's just see this. He's going to explain now, okay? And you'll see this clearer. So here's the naysayer. And if you are right that Torah and philosophy are mutually exclusive, then that means that one of them is a lie. That means that you either disdain wisdom or you reject Torah. So that's trying to pigeonhole him. Know that neither of these is the case. And this is where he now explains what he views is the relationship between Torah and philosophy, okay? I see human beings as composed of two opposing forces, reason and inner feelings. It is impossible to increase the one and negate the other. For people, whether they like it or not, are under the control of both of these forces. That is why the true Torah and the true philosophy, and then I love this parentheses, it's so poetic and true, the philosophy that is not yet written in one book, but is found scattered in 10,000 books, mixed in with all sorts of errors and inaccuracies. So he says true philosophy, he's not saying like Aristotle's philosophy or like, whatever. Both of them are the words of the living God. Both of them are appropriate to the nature of human beings. Both of them are true in different frameworks. Okay, so he's not anti-philosophy. He's anti-cramming philosophy into Torah or mixing the two. And what he holds is, here's my summary, philosophy and Torah are both true and necessary because the human being is comprised of a rational part and a feeling / acting part. So what he holds is philosophy is where you gain an understanding and you nurture your rational part. And Torah is where is a means of getting your feelings and your actions in line with the good and in line with justice and righteousness. So he would say that you should study philosophy, and he's going to say that more explicitly later on, but don't try to think that the Torah is being a philosophical book. And in terms of answering, going back to our original point here, so he would say that the Torah talks about God in physical, emotional terms because it's trying to mold your emotions and harness your emotions and channel your emotions. But if you read a philosopher's work on God, they're going to talk about God in abstract, dry, intellectual terms because that's the purpose of philosophy. Philosophy is trying to get you, like, according to him, if you read Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah about, in the Rambam about like who God is and stuff, he would say, yeah, that'd make a nice philosophy book, but don't try to say that that's Torah. That's not what the Torah is aimed at. Interesting. Why?
Because I'd assume that he believes that the Torah is perfect, and like if you're gonna make a book that is directed towards making people who pursue the good,
yeah,
like it has to be directed towards people, and people have both of these.
Ooh, that's a sophisticated argument. I like that argument. Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. So I'll tell you what I think. In case anyone didn't hear that. By the way, people who can hear, can you guys hear the people in the room now, the people who are on Zoom? Because I noticed that the mic was switched on 1. It's supposed to be on 3. Did you hear what was just said?
Yeah, sometimes you can. But are you able to repeat anyway?
Yeah, I'll repeat it anyway. Is that Leia's saying is the Torah is designed for human beings. If what Shadal is saying is true, that the human being has these two parts, and the Torah is designed to perfect the human being, so then it should address both. The Torah should address both parts. And if the Torah didn't do that, it would be lacking in its perfection. Is that what you're saying, Leia?
Yeah.
Yeah. You sound...
Like a different... I said it in a different way, but I think it's the same.
Okay.
I have a question. Like, I feel like this is the same as the Rambam, because the Rambam is just saying that, like, yeah, what's the difference?
Let me I don't know if I ever told you this. My principal in my high school, Rabbi Fox, he said that there's one Rishon who's more Maimonidean than Maimonides, and that's the Ralbag. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example from the Ralbag that I think we would disagree with. Okay, Ralbag held that the Torah, that the text of the Torah teaches physics. Now we, I think, in this room hold that although the Torah has to be in line with physics, its goal is not to teach physics. And by that, just to show you what the Rambam means, and I might have brought this up before, he holds that all of the Beis HaMikdash and all the Kalim are like symbolic representations of physics in the universe, and that you can like study the Kalim in the Beis HaMikdash and get ideas of physics. Okay? So, and that the first parak of Bereshis is teaching like physics, So if you ask the Rambam, so we would say to Rambam, no, physics is its own science, and like that God gave us a mind to be able to understand that, but he didn't give it through Torah, okay? Rambam would argue on us the same way that you're arguing on Shadal. He'd say, if God values knowledge and God wants us to study physics, then the Torah has to be teaching physics. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
And some people would argue from another way. They would say, have you ever heard people who think that everything is in Torah? Right?
Yeah.
Right? So that's their argument, is that the Torah is God's like blueprint for the world, or is God's, guide for mankind. So all medicinal cures must be found in Torah. Like if you just decode it properly, and all, like if yoga is really healthy, somehow you should be able to derive like yoga from the, that's their argument, And again, I'm saying, I'm not trying to like, deride the argument. I'm saying that is what you're making is a good argument. Now the question is like, well, so then why isn't if you claim not everything is in Torah, then why not? And what is the scope of Torah? Yeah. So I'm just trying to show that there is this like, this spectrum. On the one side, people who say everything is in Torah, and the other side say Torah has a specific goal and nothing outside of that. And then the question is like, where do you fall on that spectrum?
Your question would even be on the Rambam though, because the Rambam does hold that you learn philosophy, which is not.
That's true also. Right, that you learn.
Is really on everyone except for that one little extreme who believes.
Yeah. Meaning even the Rambam doesn't hold that everything is taught in Torah.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, but that was a really, really good objection. Okay, that's good. All right. Now I shall return to discuss love of God, because remember, this is a commentary on Behavta. I say, now here's his definition of love of God. This is an interesting one. I say that since the divine Torah saw fit to speak in human language and to describe God to us as subject to change and as susceptible to anger and to will, to love and to hate and so on, it is therefore appropriate to describe people also as loving God or hating him. For the person who always bears God in mind and is always considering how to do what he wants and how to observe his laws and regulations, such a person would be called a lover of God. Someone who does not think about God and does not refrain from doing what is contemptible for God and who is constantly seeking new abominations to sin in, someone like that is called one who hates God. One more thing. Loving God then is not a separate mitzvah. It includes all the mitzvahs. It does not make sense to command people to love. Now, this gets to the shiur that we gave on can you command people in emotions. So the same is true of loving your neighbor or loving the ger. What did we say it means? V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. What is that mitzvah actually commanding you to do? You remember? To do stuff that you would want to be done to you. And loving the ger is the same thing. And we said all emotions that the Torah sounds like it's commanding you is really commanding you to do actions. And he's saying that about God. He's saying that really, what does it mean when the Torah says love God? It means obey his will, don't violate his will, do actions that are connected with the mitzvos. The intention is that we should take steps to do what will be beneficial to them, and we should refrain from actions that will hurt them or anger them. So he's saying love of God is not a mitzvah. It essentially is synonymous with obeying him, but it is describing it in human terms. And the hilarious thing, in my opinion, is what would the Rambam say it means that God loves us if God doesn't have emotions? He's treating us in a way that is like that is described as loving actions. And what Shadal is doing is he's saying that when the Torah says that we should love God, it means doing actions towards him that are like expressive of love, or that like we identify as human actions. It's just a funny like reversal, Yeah. What was that? Meaning like this is if you love like I don't know, your sibling, a pet dog or whatever, you do act, it expresses itself in actions, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what Shadal is saying it means to love God, is not to feel something and not even to think something. It's to do actions that are reflective of love, that you do what he wants, you refrain from not doing what he doesn't want, So I'm saying that it's a definition of love that's devoid of emotion. It's just action. It's an action-based definition. And I'm saying that's kind of funny because when you ask the Rambam, what does it mean that God loves us if God doesn't have emotions? He's saying, yeah, it means that you describe his actions as loving actions. So he's just like reversing the stream, Oh, no. Okay.
Also, that doesn't need to explain the whole beginning. If he's saying the whole beginning, he was trying to explain why loving God fits in line with his philosophy. But all he could have said is loving God doesn't actually mean to like love God. It just means to.
Yeah, he could have done this in the beginning, but he's going on a polemic against the philosophical approach to Judaism. And the reason why he went on that is he said this would be a simple. Remember, he started off by saying "V'ahavta is simple, but the Greek philosophers mess everything up. Or the Rishonim mess everything up. So this is that simple definition that he wanted to say earlier, but he had to like walk us through that. But now he goes back into his rant against the philosophical Rishonim. He says, but the kind of love described by the author of the Chovos Halavavos, which is another philosophical Rishon, and this is a quote from him, since the soul comes from the world of pure spirit, its natural tendency is to the spiritual. And when the light of wisdom shines upon it, it will naturally separate itself from the world and all its pleasures and have nothing to do with anything other than God, and will never think of anything else, etc. None of this follows the ways of Moshe's Torah. This approach is taken from the philosophers who had only disdain for the simple people who do the necessary work of God. Rather, according to the Torah, the one who formed the earth and made it and who alone established it, he did not create it a waste, but formed it for a habitation. And the proper worship and love of God has nothing to do with withdrawal from society and living in the desert, but rather living with other human beings and treating them with righteousness and justice. I don't know the full view of the Chovos HaLevavos, but apparently the Chovos HaLevavos did advocate for the Rambam's definition of love of God, or I mean, obviously he came before that, but meaning based on knowledge, but the Chovos HaLevavos apparently also had some sort of like withdrawal from society model. And the Shadal is saying that's basically like elitist, that like, that's like saying that only the highest level of philosophers can be involved and they have to withdraw from society. And this is kind of like, it's reminiscent of the critique that the Hasidim had on the Misnagdim, you know, that real connection to God is only through intellectual learning and like, but no, it's really for all people. Okay, skip over this point because this is the least important point. Now he pulls out the big guns against the Rambam. Rambam thought that true love of God is only possible for the person who understands all of existence and that it is a function of a person's wisdom. To that end, he included in his Laws of the Foundations of Torah 3 chapters that teach people something about the creation in order that true love of God would enter their hearts. And what he means here is chapters 2, 3, and 4 in Yesodei Torah is just a summary of all Aristotelian physics and metaphysics. Okay, it's just like how the 4 elements work and like how the celestial spheres work and how the planets revolve, and it's just all like science stuff based on Aristotle, which is all outdated now. Okay, all of this is so distant from the purpose of the Torah. Those 3 chapters have nothing in common with the rest of his Mishnah Torah. Had he been a true philosopher, exclamation point, he would have realized that a new generation might come along and disprove the theories of Aristotle and his students concerning biology and astronomy, and that his more nevuchim would become a more sheker. Okay, but he believed that everything Aristotle had to say about the sublunar world was indisputably true. Now, so what he's claiming here, by the way, is he's saying that the Rambam's view goes against Torah, and is based on dogmatic Aristotelianism. You know, I think we talked about the word dogmatic. What does it mean to be dogmatic about someone or something? Yeah, like automatically, like unthinkingly, like everything Aristotle says is right and he can't be wrong, you know? Now, this is the one point that I think Shadal is actually straight up mistaken on, that, and I'm not gonna go into this because we don't have time, but like the Rambam, for example, when the Rambam talks about astrology, not astronomy, but astrology, he writes about how like Chazal believed in astrology because it was the science of their times. But now we know, and he's saying now we know like in the 1200s, that astrology has no scientific basis. Rambam recognized that scientific ideas could be outdated. And he advocated for Aristotle because back then that was what they thought was correct, but he would admit that Aristotle could be disproven. Like, you know, so I think that's a little, that's the one mistake I think Shadal is making. I think everything else is like a theory that's defensible, but I think this is an actual mistake. Right, but let's conclude now. I'm sorry we have to rush this, but let's conclude with what I think is the most important point for us, okay? First of all, he says, I'm not saying this in order to remove a hair's breadth of honor from the Rambam. I mean, he doesn't want to like, you know, he's not trying to like knock down the Rambam for its own sake. Rather, I want to let the young scholars of our generation know that a true philosopher should not simply rely on other philosophers. Rather, it is fitting to analyze each topic on its own. Anyone who does not have the capacity to do this, but instead relies on whatever philosophers are well accepted in his day, such as Rav Avraham ibn Ezra and the Rambam did with Aristotle and the Muslim philosophers, and such as, I thought this was a typo for Rambaman, yeah. Which is Moses Mendelssohn, I guess that's his acronym. Yeah, I've never heard that other than Shadal. Did with Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz and Christian Wolff, and just as others do with, with Immanuel Kant, Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, and Benedict Spinoza. You've heard of Spinoza? Another like, Jewish, but, not religious philosopher. So anyone who relies on other philosophers that are well accepted is no more a true philosopher than someone who relies on Avraham Avinu, Moshe Hillel, or Rabbi Akiva. Okay. So in other words, don't just hitch your there's a term for this, hitch your wagon or train. What was that? No, like hitch yourself to the train of like Aristotle. I don't know what.
Why does he think that the Rambam and Ibn Ezra and whatever are doing?
Because we just saw he does think that the Rambam was basically saying that like everything Aristotle said about physics is true, and was just kind of like following it because Aristotle was an authority.
Assuming that that's not true. Right?
Yeah, I'm saying that that's not true. Yeah.
Yeah, then this whole point is not true. Then he would just agree with the Rambam. He said, like, he does think that you should think for yourself, and if the Rambam
the Rambam does. I mean, what's the Rambam's motto when it comes to who you accept truth from?
whoever it is.
For whoever it is, yeah, right. Is accept the truth from whoever says it, So yeah, I do think that the Rambam would agree with this advice, but Shadal thinks that the Rambam didn't implement this advice.
But then what is this Shadal's main criticism?
This is his main message for the youth of his generation, and this is why. This is him saying, "I'm not trying to diminish the honor from the Rambam, but I'm doing this." And there's one more thing, and then I'll be able to answer your question. My purpose in writing all this is not to dissuade the youth from studying wisdom and languages. I don't know why he brings in languages here, by the way. But he's saying, don't. I'm not trying to say don't study philosophy. Never has that thought crossed the minds of my ancestors and teachers, the rabbis of Italy. My sole purpose is to try to keep the youth from accepting, without thinking, whatever the current popular and respected philosophy is in their generation. This is a bitter illness that comes upon them, not because they seek wisdom and love truth, but because they love bogus honor and are hoping to find favor in the eyes of their contemporaries. Meaning, like, these youth just want to be viewed as philosophers. So like they'll quote, Kant and Hegel and Spinoza, and they're not actually like searching for truth. But those who love truth and have strong and courageous minds know that there are many ideas that were famous and glorified for one or many generations, and in a later generation were forgotten or disparaged. And there are many opinions that for a long time were considered shameful and disgraceful, and then later became praised and glorified and filled the earth. So just to summarize, and we'll discuss in the remaining time. Last 2 points. Think for yourself. True philosophers don't blindly follow authorities, and don't fall prey to passing philosophical trends or seeking honor. And that's what he's accusing the Rambam and Ibn Ezra of that they fell into the trap of Aristotelianism, and felt that would last forever, or that was reflective of the truth. And people in his day were doing that then. People in our day do that now. I mean, look, this is, part of the central study, or not central study, the topic of studying secular knowledge. Like, people will say that Rav Soloveitchik, studied philosophy in the University of Berlin and like got caught up in all these philosophical trends that were going on back then. And like that perverted his view of Judaism. And people will say the same thing about, other modern thinkers who study philosophy. And I can't call it irony because it's not irony. The Rambam would agree with this advice, but the Rambam would say that he was thinking for himself. So does that round out the picture of the critique more, or did you have a separate question on like what his point was here?
Yeah, I still have a question because when he says like that would be, can you go back to the side where he says that would be the same as if you just followed Abraham, emotional, because then it seems like his whole argument is to just follow Abraham and Moshe and the Torah.
So that's what I thought he was saying, and then I remembered what is his definition of a philosopher?
It's like something separate.
Something separate from Torah, So I think what he's saying is like these guys. This is how I took it. These guys, meaning the youth in his day, wanted this bogus honor of I want my university contemporaries to look at me as being sophisticated because I'm following philosophers, but if you just blindly follow philosophers, then that's no better of philosophy than you saying, I'm just going to follow whatever Avraham Avinu says, which is like not philosophy, Philosophy, yeah, like in his definition of philosophy, of like truth seeking for its own sake.
So I'm confused as to what his belief is, because does he believe that you should learn philosophy?
Yes.
But everything is going to be connected to Torah somehow. So like, how are you learning philosophy?
So what he's saying is you should not learn philosophy you should not try to read your philosophical views into Torah, because Torah is about guiding action. And
eventually it's going to clash, because let's say you have a philosophical view and you don't read it into Torah.
Okay, so that's a good question about what happens when there's a clash, and that I don't know how he addresses.
Like he even said it himself that like you won't follow the Torah.
Right. That's a very good question, and that I would need to learn more about the Shadal to know what he actually holds on that. I don't feel qualified to speculate on what he does hold about that. One more point I just want to make before the shiur officially ends, and then we can continue discussing, is I mentioned from a rhetorical analysis standpoint, I think this thing that he's saying that he's writing for the youth explains why he was so harsh throughout the entire thing. Why do you think he was so harsh through the entire thing? How?
I mean, I'm making out.
Blindly following who? The Rambam, right? In other words, he's basically saying that, like, in the same way that you could easily get caught up in the secular philosophers and just blindly follow them, don't blindly follow the Rishonim even. Think for yourself through each of these issues. And he's basically being so harsh to counteract that like feeling of awe and untouchability that the Rambam and these other, philosophical Rishonim have, because he doesn't want these, I don't know if these are kids or like just, young Italian lads, like, getting caught up in the, in the same way he doesn't want them getting caught up in the secular philosophers where they're not thinking for themselves. He doesn't want them getting caught up in the Jewish Rishonim, philosophical Rishonim and not thinking for themselves, So I think that explains the rhetoric. So just really quickly to end, and then we'll discuss as long as people want. To me, the main takeaway was this point, because I think this fits in with a shiur I gave on wolves, that it's very easy to just think that someone has all the answers, or that like one person has the true framework and like the other ones don't. And he's saying basically like, you just really have to be on guard against like looking at things only through one framework or through one method, and letting that, blind you. And that's, for me, my takeaway. And I would have asked you for your takeaways, but like, I don't want to hold people hostage. So I'll say, have a good Shabbos for everyone here, and then we'll continue discussing now questions that you have until you don't have questions. Okay, end. Yeah, go ahead.
You're
all gonna have a good Shabbos.
Honestly, this seems more like a criticism of big people, like the Rambam and what?
Yeah.
More criticism of the big guys, not the little guys. Like,
so it is interesting, because I think so. Certainly, he is saying that the Rambam made this mistake, but he is acknowledging that there is such a thing as a true philosopher, and his definition of a true philosopher would be someone who thought for themselves. And I don't know what he holds about like Kant and Hegel and Spinoza, but like it, or even Aristotle. Like, he's not going to say that Aristotle wasn't a true philosopher, right? Because Aristotle did come up with Aristotelianism, So I think he would say that those guys are at least being true philosophers and independent thinkers, even if they were wrong,
Yeah, I think he's saying more that people aren't like, they're like too like consumed by like other ideas around them, and they're not using their own mind to the extent that they could.
Mm-hmm.
And he seems to say that if these like top thinkers are falling into traps of just taking other people's ideas and making them their own, I think he's saying that that's an inherent flaw. Like, but that also is elitist.
Yeah, you mean for him to say that?
Basically, someone like the Rambam, who's so admired, even though majority of his ideas aren't.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So
you're saying that it's elitist for him to make that accusation, or you're saying that
I'm saying it's elitist to expect people not to be that way, because
you're
right. Supposed to do just go off like Thoreau in a cabin and open yourself and not speak.
Okay, good. Right. Okay, so this brings me to another point, which I was going to say is one of my critiques of Shadal, which is that I think that there's a danger. I mean, it's kind of related to our other shiur, Lo Tasuru Achrei Levavechem Achrei Einechem. There's another danger that like you fancy yourself, I am the real independent thinker. Like I can actually like do this on my own. And like, yeah, Avraham can, and like Socrates can, but like if you think that you are at that point and you're not at that point, then you will fake yourself out into thinking that you're being an independent thinker, but you're really just going to be following some other people's notions. And that's what he's saying that the Rambam did, right? Because again, like I think he knows that the Rambam would say that he's not being a dogmatic Aristotelian, but he's saying that the Rambam is being a dogmatic Aristotelian, And I think that the irony, and this is, again, I'm not saying this based on history, but like, I think if you looked at the other Italian scholars in the 1800s, they're all talking and thinking like Shadal. So someone could say to Shadal, like, you're just approaching this the same way that all the other Italian philosophers are, and you aren't being independent thinking, So like, there's a certain like, like I think this is getting to the point you were getting to is like, it's almost inescapable that people are going to be influenced by other thinkers unless you're a real Avraham Avinu, So like, in my opinion, the best you can do is just be aware of what your biases are, be aware that you could be wrong, look at things through multiple perspectives, but don't think of yourself as a truly independent thinker, because it's unlikely that you really are, just be aware of your biases and try to minimize the biases as much as you can.
I think it's more about like an attachment to a name.
Yeah.
Like also talking about here.
Like,
let's say someone's really attached to the Rambam as a figure.
Yeah.
Like more like a cult of personality.
Exactly.
Ideas. And I think he's saying that people have to look past the names. And I'm not shading Rambam, but when he throws Aristotle in there, I'm sure back then people were like, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
I like to name drop, even though it's important to credit people.
Yeah.
I think it does play with people's heads.
Yeah, definitely. And remember, that's why the Rambam, when we were doing the B'Shem Omro, the Rambam says he's not going to quote anyone by name because he doesn't want to like influence people. And also, this is why when I went in the very, very beginning of this year and I said that Shalhavit students by default are Maimonidean, and I use the quotation marks. I don't like the term Maimonidean because it implies like dogmatic follower of the Rambam. Look, if I were Maimonidean, I wouldn't give this shiur. You know, like yes, I agree with the Rambam, and like his framework of Judaism is the one that makes most sense to me. But
no, you would though because you're pursuing truth.
Oh, if I were true Maimonidean, very good. Yeah, right.
Wrong. Honestly, sorry, Leah, I disagree. I think he brought this up on purpose to strengthen the Rambam.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you do.
Very. This guy's an idiot.
You think that I'm saying that Shadal is an idiot?
Yeah, kind of. Like
I don't think so.
No one's really like this.
In my mind, I don't even see the distinction between Shadal and Rambam.
In my mind, they're like nothing alike.
Wow. Okay. Well, yeah.
Y'all take away different.
Yeah. I'm glad I didn't form them in the takeaways then. But no, I think that the well, first of all, let me just go to the takeaways, or not the takeaways, the principal claims. So if you want an itemized list, so I clearly disagree with number one, but at the same time, think that there are a lot of outdated concepts in that the Greek philosophers read into Torah, and that's why it's difficult to do certain topics like nevuah and hashgacha and angels, because all of those are wrapped up in Greek philosophy, which is outdated. You know, so they did this. I think they did this because in the same way that when we would approach, Perek Aleph of Bereshis, we approach it through the lens of modern physics, and I think that we just have no other choice. But they did read Greek philosophy into Torah. So that's that. Two is this part I do disagree with him. I think that this, in this sense, I am a Maimonidean. I do think that the purpose of Torah is to teach truth for its own sake, and that the purpose of human life is to know truth, and etc. Three is I definitely disagree with this one. I think that philosophical Torah content is to give you knowledge. Four, I'm still figuring out, because the thing I really liked about this, which I haven't talked about with you in Tehillim, but we talked about this in Tefillah, is I do think that this is what Tehillim is doing. And what Tefillah is doing is that it's addressing the emotional part of you, because you need to cultivate an emotional relationship with God through this elaborate terminology and human descriptions. And I don't know if the Torah is doing this like as its primary goal, but the Torah uses this as a tool. Five, I do hold that this is true, but again, I hold that Torah and philosophy overlap. It's not that they're mutually exclusive. Six, I don't agree with this for many reasons. I mean, number one, I agree with Rambam's definition. Number two is I don't think it makes sense to say that love of God, the way that love of God is talked about in Torah, and the fact that like everyone counts it as a mitzvah, I don't think it makes sense to say it's just like telling you to obey God. And like, what's the difference between love of God and fear of God then? I think there are problems with this.
You agree with that? You're saying Torah and philosophy.
I'm saying that they are true, that they are both true and necessary, but that they are overlapping. And Shadal saying they're not overlapping.
Okay.
Yeah. Seven is I don't think the philosophical love of God stems from an elitist mentality. I do think though that that the more knowledge you have, then the more you will be able to love God. And if you call that elitist, then you know what else is elitist is like playing a trumpet and like playing violin and like being a basketball player. Like it's elitist in the sense that there are going to be people who are better and worse, and the people who are better get further in it. Like the world is elitist. I don't think that Rambam's view is contrary to Torah. This is the one I said I disagree with him factually with, is that I don't think that Rambam said that Aristotle can't be wrong. I think that's just a slander. And then I agree with 9 and 10. So that's for the record, that's my, my take on this. But I'm not, I do challenge your thing. I'm not bringing this in to deride it or make fun of it or anything like that.
No, I didn't think that, but
yeah.
I think like, it depends how you approach this. I could easily see someone else defending this from a perspective, not even thinking of their Rambam. You know what I'm saying? Or
no, say it again.
Like they would, not comparing to Rambam. Like he made one like big.
Well, remember,
comment at the Rambam that I think is
no. The whole article, I said this whole shiur comes from an article that was called Shadal's polemic against the philosophical interpretation, from this article, and in the article, which I didn't show you the article, I can send you the article. Then he made it to be about the the Rambam. So that's why I'm.
This would be interesting to see other like people like that have philosophical Judaism and see like how they would contrast to him.
Yeah, so I found a Hebrew article which I meant to read before preparing this, which is a defending the Rambam against Shadal, and then I saw another one that was like the other way around, like showing how Shadal was like going easy, you know, and like yeah, and then what we, I don't know if we're gonna have time to do this, but the real attack on the Rambam is from Rav Hirsch. And Rav Hirsch, I mean, he attacks him on numerous scores, and in some ways is much harder. Like, have you ever heard the phrase about the Rambam, from Moses to Moses, there's no one like Moses? Yeah. Like, I think it's on the Rambam's grave, and that means like from Moshe Rabbeinu to the Rambam, there's no one like him. So I think Rav Hirsch says like, until the next Moses came along, and that's Moses Mendelssohn, and like he basically blames the Reform movement on the Rambam, you know, yeah. So
that would be cool to see. You know that he does have a lot of more modern ideas, like integrating history and philosophy.
Yeah, maybe we could do that on Monday, just because it's one of his letters and it's not very long.
I agree with you guys. I like Shadal is like, I think there are better arguments to make about like why philosophical Judaism isn't like, or shouldn't be a thing or whatever. And then I'm sure there.
This is not the only argument. I mean, there's lots and lots of arguments against.
This argument could be him saying it's not for the average person.
Yeah. Right.
And I think that's fair.
Right.
Like, even Rambam would probably agree with that.
Like,
he does make other statements like you have to dedicate your time to understanding.
Right.
And the average person can't.
Yeah.
So I think it's fair for him to say that.
Yeah.
He's basically trying to give you leeway because most people can't do what the Rambam is saying. You can't really spend all the time understanding God, especially back then where you didn't go to school, you didn't learn science.
Yeah. I hear that. Yeah. So again, you know, hopefully throughout the course of your learning, you'll see lots and lots of different critiques of different things, and you know, and sometimes you get like a nice chunk like this where it's like an all-out attack, and it's fun to analyze. All right, stop here for today.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I feel like they both